how many of you are self-critical? 90 to 95% of the room raises their hand. And if you look at it from a psychological perspective, self-criticism is self-loathing. Self-loathing. That means 90 to 95% of people are running around with self-loathing. And by the way, the two people who don't raise their hand, who don't have this problem, they impersonate sovereignty. You look at them and you know they are. And one of the women said, I only work in places where I am celebrated. That was one of the comments from one of the women who's, sovereign like that. And just amazing to see.
Welcome to the You-est podcast. I'm Julie Reisler. I am here again with you, my soul friend, as your host and hopefully your guide to your most authentic You-est you. And as we're going to be talking about today, to your sovereign You-est you, your sovereign self. And I don't want to give it all away because I'm here with an amazing guest, Dr. Emma Seppälä, who is the author of this incredible book, Sovereign, which is Sovereign: Reclaim Your Freedom, Energy, and Power in a Time of Distraction, Uncertainty, and Chaos. Oh my gosh, all of that feels so true. Emma, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to get into what does this even mean? Like, how do we even begin to digest the incredible work that you put together on being sovereign? First of all, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So I would love, even before we get to the book, maybe we can just talk for a few moments about you, your background. Like, how did you even get to the point of wanting to write this book? And yeah, let's start there. What got you here?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in France, which sounds romantic, but as a child, when you grow up, especially in Paris, there's this sort of a negative tone to things. People are always sort of critical and focusing on the negative. Ironic, given that it's France and that they have all this cool stuff going on there. But anyway, when I moved to the US, I noticed, wow, people are more positive here. I was like, I like this better. But I also noticed after a few years that people burn themselves into the ground working. There's this sense of I am what I do, and that's my worth. And then after college, I went to China for a couple of years, and I saw people who had nothing and were grateful for everything. And they just had so much resilience despite the hardship of their lives. I saw the same in Tibet and India. I thought, gosh, this is so interesting. Like happiness, fulfillment, those things they don't teach you about in school and college, they have less to do with our circumstances than with our state of mind, even though we think it's our circumstances, right? And so it really got me thinking more deeply about this. And I did a master's in East Asian studies, looking at a lot of the East Asian, South Asian traditions and philosophies, looking at how is it that you cultivate a sovereign state of mind, a state of mind that is so powerfully strong and able to withstand what's coming its way. And I actually wrote a book, my first book called The Happiness Track, on this idea that, and on the science of happiness, and how that actually helps us to show up at our fullest potential at work and so forth. Just kind of the opposite of what we're doing. People tend to do the burnout method to be successful, but actually they're going to be more successful if they take care of themselves. So that was my first book. And then 10 years later, I had 2 kids in the meanwhile and different things and research studies and so forth I was running. And I realized, it was during the pandemic that I realized, wow, like you can do all the well-being practices, but if you're still falling for beliefs and behaviors that are standing in your way, it almost doesn't matter that much. Like it can help a little bit, but you're still stuck in life. You still might have anxiety or depression or any of the things that are signs that you might need to change something. And most of us don't even know we're running those kinds of programs in our mind. And so with all my heart, I wrote Sovereign to share both through science and through personal stories and stories of others, this demonstrate in what way we stand in our own way and how we can free ourselves so we can really, truly live our fullest potential. Because we know that 70% of people on their deathbeds regret not living the life they wanted. And let's not be one of those.
Yeah, that is in actually the intro to this podcast, that is literally what I say. And it's something that's kind of haunted me, not in a bad way. When we think about that last breath, I don't know. I've always thought like, my gosh, you don't have another chance. So now being here, living and breathing, and this is for everyone, as you're listening to our soul friends that are listening, really take this in, because what you're talking about, this can be a life changer so that you don't have
Yes.
to get to the end and say,
Yes.
shoot, I missed it.
Absolutely. And that's why I chose the word sovereign too, because, there's no word in psychology for what I'm talking about. And yet we need we need to start to think about things differently. It's great to do gratitude lists. Do them. I've used gratitude as a practice, but if you're ignoring ways that you're behaving towards yourself, or ways that your behaviors you're engaging in that are destructive to you, it's not enough.
Yeah. I know, for those who've not yet read your book, I found myself like underlying so much, and I was like, oh crap, like I'm underlying the whole book. Like, this is not going to work. This is like, like the opposite. Maybe I should just, everything I don't underline would be, it was just, there's so much packed in to what you're sharing. I thought maybe, and I know you and I talked about this earlier, really looking at sovereignty and being sovereign from the different perspectives
Yeah.
and avenues that you talk about in the book.
Mhm.
Just before we do that, I want to say something you had mentioned early on when we started, this belief that I am what I do. And I I know for me, it's taken years to unravel that. And just, I know from the community and the responses I get, and we get, this is a big one. Like, really, that
Mhm.
unraveling, I am not
Mhm.
what I do,
Yes.
that my worthiness is not wrapped up in the money I make, or the school I went to, or the work that I'm doing. And I think that point about, being burnt out, anyhow, we'll get to it. But this is one that I know has been really on people's hearts. So anyhow, yeah,
Yeah, that's one
appreciate.
example, right? And then, the other day I met someone. He had some high position, and then suddenly he was retiring, and he was just lost, miserable, and had this sense of no identity, which of course there's a normal transition of life that happens at the time, but this sense that I don't have worth if I'm not productive is a very American cultural belief. And it's
Yeah.
just that, it's a belief. Once we realize that those are beliefs, they don't have to run your life anymore, but we can get into that.
Yeah. Let's start with, and I love this reminder about beliefs. I've heard it said, the BS, belief system. Like, you got to check out sometimes the BS. What are we believing that's not true? Let's start with the sovereign self, and go from there. I know it's a lot to. We're not going to be able to cover everything in the chapter, but let's start with the self, the sovereign self, and then we'll move into the
Yeah.
other areas that you really focused on.
Yeah. So I'm the faculty director for the Women's Leadership Program at the Yale School of Management. So I get to see these cohorts of amazingly talented women leaders come through, 3-4 times a year. And I also teach other executives, men and women both. But whenever I ask, how many of you are self-critical, 90 to 95% of the room raises their hand. And if you look at it from a psychological perspective, self-criticism is self-loathing. Self-loathing. That means 90 to 95% of people are running around with self-loathing. And by the way, the two people who don't raise their hand, who don't have this problem, they impersonate sovereignty. You look at them and you know they are. And one of the women said, I only work in places where I am celebrated. That was one of the comments from one of the women who's, sovereign like that. And just amazing to see. But anyway, let's go back to that. What does the research show? Self-criticism leads to anxiety, depression, fear of failure, less willingness to want to try again in the face of failure. It's the opposite of resilience. It's the opposite of inner strength, of inner power, of the ability to show up at your fullest potential. So, and yet we believe that it's good for us. Oh, isn't that the key to self-improvement? No, self-awareness is. Sure, know where you need help, know where you need to grow. That's great. You can work on it, or you can get help from somebody, right? But self-criticism is those words you use for yourself when you make a mistake, when that little voice inside your head that puts you down. For example, I often ask people to think back on the latest mistake that they made. I mean, And then to think about, well, what are the words you use to speak to yourself in those moments? Usually they are words like, you're such an idiot, and worse. Really intense, mean words. First of all, what about that makes sense? What about it's basically, we complain about toxic relationships and we complain about toxic workplaces. Most people are in a toxic relationship with themselves. How does that even make sense? Okay, so now we know from the data also that it just leads to consequences we don't want, basically lack of resilience. Now, when I ask, okay, so what are the words you would use for your best friend that made a mistake? They'll say things like, you're okay. It's no big deal. Everyone makes mistakes. Like, such compassionate words. It's like, well, what's the difference between you and your best friend? Like, why the difference? The only difference between you is that you live in different bodies. Like, why should they get a completely different, more kind and loving reaction than you yourself? And when you look at the data, people who have a more life-supportive relationship with themselves have better mental health, have better physical health, have greater immunity, have better relationships with others, because when you're hard on yourself, you're going to be hard on the people that you love the most and want to hurt the least, and so on. There's a host of benefits. And, I love these two quotes that I think about a lot with regards to this. One is by Maya Angelou, who says, I learned a long time ago that the wisest thing I can do is to be on my own side. What about that? Doesn't make sense, right? And then another quote is by Audre Lorde, self-described a gay Black woman in a straight white man's world. And she's an activist and poet, writer. And she said, self-care is not self-indulgence. It's an act of political warfare. And I just love that. Because sometimes, especially women, I would say, are like, oh, well, I have to go and take care of everything and everybody and everything. It's like, hold on a second. Like, how do you want to show up on the battlefield of your life? You want to show up wounded because you were hitting yourself on the way there? Or do you want to show up in brand spanking new armor as you loved your way there, So
Powerful.
That's, in a nutshell, what sovereignty looks like. And self-criticism asks, am I good enough? It's always asking that question. And that's the fear that's running in so many people's heads. Am I good enough? I always think people who are really perfectionist or overachiever, at the root of that is an experience of conditional love, right? And so there's always this sense, am I safe? Am I good enough for whatever? And replacing that, the sovereign way to replace that is, what's good for me right now? We know to take care of our pets and our kids. We know when they've had to drink and to rest and all that. Can we do the same for ourselves? What's good for me right now?
I love that shift. And I'll say, as somebody who has done a 180, right, as like, I think the word, you didn't say it, but I think we often abandon ourselves and I've seen this, clients, I've worked with them myself. And really shifting to befriending, thinking of like your best friend, making that yourself. And I love that shift from, don't ask, am I good enough? Ask, what's good for me now? Something I know that's helped me is like, what's the most loving thing I can do now? To change. And you said this, it's changing those words that we're saying to ourselves. And I love that reminder, Dr. Seppälä, I love that reminder that think about what you would say to your best friend or someone you really love from an unconditional place. And then how do you put that back on yourself and start that relationship, sovereign relationship with yourself? Really beautiful.
That's how you're going to show up powerful. Like I tell you, that the 2-3 people in the room who do not have a self-critical relationship with themselves are the leaders in the room. Every time they have a wow factor.
Yeah. Amazing. I also think, and you'd mentioned this, I know we talked beforehand, for those of us, whether it's with children or grandchildren or just people in our lives that we're here as a teacher, a role model. I don't know, for me, I know early on, I really made this decision. I've got to do the work because I want, for both kids, especially my daughter, and just for anyone listening, like really to get your book and digest this, starting with ourself, we of course transmit through what we're saying, but also how we're being and what we're doing. And
That's
this
right.
hits home for me. I think all the time, I'm so grateful that my daughter has a healthy esteem. And I think part of it is I'm not perfect at this, but there's what you're saying. It really resonates, that really learning to, like you said, just to have, it's not only not self-centered to take care of yourself, to give yourself that care and love and respect. I heard you say it's like an act of, it's a radical act in this world. It can feel that way, but it's
Yeah.
powerful.
It's contrary to what we're taught. It's contrary to what we learn. And you're absolutely right that
Yeah.
you pass it on. Why is everyone walking around with self-loathing? Because they learned it from their culture, from their families, from their societies, from their religions, wherever. It doesn't really matter where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But the fact that everyone's got it, sometimes you forget to question it. It's like, oh, well, everyone has a TV, so of course I should have a TV. Well, why? Why do you need a TV? Right? But we don't ask that question. But everyone's walking around with self-criticism, and you're supposed to like shove off a compliment, or you're not supposed to let compliments come in, into your mind and accept them. And well, why? Sovereignty involves questioning any sort of program that's running in your mind that's not life supportive.
Yeah. Great reminder. Love that piece and that point. We need to be questioning anything that doesn't feel loving or kind. Question it.
Yeah.
Ask into it. And the other piece I love that you said is that resilience, and especially for those who are in leadership positions or want to feel more of a leader role in their life, it's actually through this sovereign self that you find resilience with the data, with the research. And I mean, it makes sense. Let's talk about sovereign mind, because oftentimes we can have a subconscious running program that we may not be realizing. And sometimes those beliefs come from thoughts that we've been thinking for a long time. What did you find about the sovereign mind? Curious minds are wanting to know.
Well, the example of moving from France to the US, right? It was really interesting because sometimes you need to move to a different cultural context, which could be just a different state or a different, city or whatever in your own country. But you notice, oh, people do things differently. Like moving from the Midwest, from California to the Midwest, I was like, oh, people are humble here. Like humility is not a word I would use to describe people on the coasts in general. I'm generalizing, but it's not a thing, right? And the Midwest, you're like, wow, people are humble, right? So it's just, every time that happens, you get an invitation. Hey, the way you've always been doing things isn't the only way, and it's not necessarily the best way. And guess what? You get to choose, right? And so when I moved to the US, I was like, all right, I'm done with all this negativity business. I'm just done with that, right? But first you have to see what's going on. And so there's so many different, I call them imprints. It's so many imprints, impressions in our mind from everything we take in. Our media, you are what you eat is true of whatever you imbibe with your mind. If you're going to watch news all day, you're going to feel anxious a lot, right? If you're going to, whatever you put your attention on, you become, that's what your mind is thinking about. And it's really important to realize that, like speaking of the news, right? Like when I lived in China, we would laugh at the headlines because we'd be like, oh, look at these headlines. They're all good news. Like this is so Pollyannish, right? But then when I came back to the US and I saw everything is bad news and they highlight in big, like crimes, horrendous crimes, but they don't need to highlight that so much. Like, why do we need to know all the details, right? So I was realizing, wow, what I thought was mind conditioning in China was, but here it's just the same. It's the information that is delivered in a certain way to get you to feel or think a certain way, which is fine. And this is not about anger at the man. That's not at all what I'm talking about here. But what I'm talking about here is becoming aware of what you want to condition your mind with. And it's interesting because I got to sit next to a colonel in the military whose job it was to condition the minds, brainwash the minds, whatever word you want to use, of the enemy, of the Taliban. And he was creating manipulative messaging, right? So I said, well, how do you go about your life and how do you teach your kids and stuff about this idea that, the messaging has about the messaging that the child takes in. He's like, well, when I go through the grocery store and my child wants the unhealthy cereal, I say, oh, why do you want that cereal? And the child's like, oh, because Dad, look, it's so fun. It's like all these colors. It's like really fun. Okay, why do you think it's fun? Oh, look at there's these little cartoon figures and there's game on the back and it's like colorful cereal and it looks so yummy. And why do you think that they did it like that? Oh, because kids would love it. Getting their kids. It was so interesting to see him training his daughter how to think through how she's conditioning her mind, right? And we have a choice how we do that. And there are certain things in our mind that sit deeper, and those are traumatic events that happen, and they are imprints, and they're kind of more intensely in our memory. The negative emotional events tend to be more solidified, and why all this talk of imprints? Because they can stand in the way of us moving forward, right? I know someone who is just constantly taking in news all the time. She's terrified constantly, right? But if you have a trauma imprint of some sort, that can also stop you from moving forward because you live in that fear of that moment that was a long time ago, but it's still like right in front of you because you still have the trauma. So getting aware of the imprints that are conditioning our mind involves both, like I said, that awareness, but also and practices such as meditation to be able to become aware of it in the first place. But secondly, it also has to do with working through trauma. And we did a research study with veterans with trauma, and we used a breathing practice called sky breath meditation, which was offered by a nonprofit called Project Welcome Home Troops. And what that helped them do is after a week, their anxiety normalized. It was still normalized a month and a year later. And we replicated the study since. And, it was one of the most moving studies that I ran, but it's just one way that we can start to gain sovereignty over the things in our mind that might be holding us back, keeping us in fear, keeping us in anxiety, keeping us in ignorance of what it is that is overshadowing our mind. So that's just in a nutshell. There's a lot more I could talk about here. But the key to sovereignty, the first key is awareness. Oh my gosh, look at that. Look at that program running my mind.
Hello, fellow lightworker, soul friend. This is Julie. I just wanted to pop in here really quickly to share something very exciting. I have opened the doors to the Sanctuary for Lightworkers. This is a really powerful, spiritual, high vibrational community for those, if you feel like you're a highly sensitive empath, you're someone who really wants to make a big difference on the planet. You're a change maker, a light worker, a soul seeker. My friend, this is for you. To learn more, go to juliereisler.com/sanctuary. And I want to share, we'll be meeting bi-weekly. It is going to be all about helping you to develop your intuition, to connect to your spirit guides, to use the ancient practices around sacred geometry, breath work, learning about how to manage your energy and your chakras, manifestation. It's going to be so powerful. And we're going to be meeting once a month where I will be doing private, intuitive, guided messages just for those in the sanctuary. So if this is of interest, if this is a soul yes, a soul calling, go to juliereisler.com/sanctuary or go below, leave a comment here on YouTube. I will answer any questions. And I hope that it works and that it aligns and that I get to meet you soon in the sanctuary. Lots of love to you always. I'm hearing both the awareness and then the underlying root. As you're talking is remembering we always have choice.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm hearing too. There's always a choice, even when it feels like there's not. There's always a choice to look at it different, to ask a different question. Like the colonel or the person in the military who was training his daughter. I love that. I wish I'd heard that years ago.
I know, right?
With my kids, but that's all right. But that awareness is number one. That's a really good reminder. Can you just share for a minute? Because I can just tell, I can sense people are like, oh, what's the sky breath? So I don't know if you can just give a quick example or demonstration or just share what that entails with the breathing and counts. And
so I recommend learning from a trained instructor, and it does take a couple of days, but I can share a shorter breathing exercise. But it's a breathing protocol, and it stems originally from India. It was actually, if you're not veteran or military, you can learn it through a nonprofit called Art of Living over like a weekend Zoom class. But what our research has found is that it really helps with trauma and anxiety and depression as well. And what I really liked about it is, and this goes a little bit into the terrain of the sovereign emotions chapter, but most of us have never learned how to handle our negative emotions. It's just not something we learn at school. At college, we're just supposed to sort of, just go through life somehow suppressing them, which is what we end up doing, which is leads to all sorts of negative repercussions. But one thing that's really interesting is that breathing, and in psychology is often offered these thoughts like, change your thoughts, change your life. It's all this whole idea of like, change how you're thinking, which is okay, but only to a certain extent, because we know the brain, when you have a very strong emotion, you're not able to think clearly. That's how the brain works. So it doesn't work when you have a strong emotion, right? So what was really interesting to me in the studies that we ran with sky breath meditation is that it doesn't just calm the mind, it calms your physiology. So you're conditioning your nervous system for greater calm. And that's really powerful. And that creates that sovereignty, right? Because our nervous system right now is pretty much conditioned for fight or flight. From the caffeine we drink in the morning to our go lifestyle and the constant influx of stimulation coming at us and demands. And that combination, sorry, she's scratching.
All good.
Okay. And that combination, that's why most people are so stressed, right? And everyone's trying to reach for things to calm themselves down, whether it's pharmaceuticals or sleeping pills or alcohol or whatever. And we need to learn to recondition ourselves to be where we're supposed to be 95% of the time, which is in parasympathetic, so that our body can rest, restore, return to health, all those things.
Yeah.
So in terms of a short breathing exercise, this is the sky breath meditation again. It's a longer protocol. But if you want to just change your state of mind in a few minutes, like maybe before something you're nervous about or right after something that was intense, when you breathe in, your heart rate increases, and when you breathe out, it slows down. So sit with your eyes closed for a few minutes. You can have your palms open so you can breathe more deeply, and breathe out for twice as long as you breathe in. So let's say you breathe in for 4, breathe out for 8, and do that for 5 minutes. You will immediately start to see a shift in your nervous system, guaranteed.
Beautiful.
I do this all the time with people.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's so easy to remember. It's basically double. Yeah. So the inhale, if it's 4, exhale is the 8. And yeah, I know this to be true personally. It's been a game changer, and love that you're just sharing, this, I think this idea, there's so many right now, so many of us that are so preconditioned to being in that fight or flight or fright, the high level stress response. What I've seen and personally seen is, and tell me if this is what you've studied, it's like the fish in the water that doesn't even realize they're swimming in the water. So it becomes the new normal. And then we, of course, thank you, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who goes all into this, right? We create those neuro chemicals that make us feel like that's the way it is, and we don't even notice. And it's like, it doesn't need to be the normal. And that's what I'm hearing you say.
It shouldn't be the normal. There's this stress researcher at Stanford called Bob Sapolsky who wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Yes, I love that book.
And he says you're only supposed to feel stress 5 minutes in your life right before you die, which is, he studies the stress response in the animal models. And we're supposed to feel stress in order to save our life. If you're being chased by a predator, stress is really great. It's like going to get you on full alert, blood rushing to your muscles, your immune system strengthened in case of injury. Boom. But right, if that animal escapes the predator, they go back to grazing peacefully. Why? Because it's in that parasympathetic mode that you repair, restore, rejuvenate, all those things. You need to be calm the rest of the time so you can then be able to show up for your life in a stronger way next time this happens. But if you're constantly in fight or flight, and that's what so that's another imprint. It's another program. Are we going to run it? It's up to us. I mean, there are inevitable stressors out there. Like your kid's going to get sick at some point. That's going to happen. Maybe your financial difficulties, relationship losses, whatever.
Yeah.
These things are going to happen anyway. So what can you do in your own sphere to minimize the additional stress of believing you have to always, I don't know, be perfect, to overschedule yourself, the caffeine, everything. I mean, I question the caffeine. Like, why? Yet the other day on a podcast, somebody was like, so are you a coffee or a tea person? I'm like, I don't drink caffeine. Like, you don't? No, like, I don't, you know what I mean? I don't want to be slave to that. And I
Yeah.
eat the kind of food that doesn't make me exhausted. So I'm okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All a choice. I'm laughing because my husband and I literally just had this conversation. He, about 10 years ago, when I had a thyroid health condition, I had this big wake up call, and I was studying a lot of this in my program, my master's degree program. And I was like, oh, it's what you're talking about. I'm like, oh, do I really need coffee and caffeine? Do I really want to be eating things that are not loving? And just from those questions. And today it's like, I just don't do that. It just, and he was like, I can't imagine not doing that. Like he has a
Right.
cup of coffee, which is fine. It's just, we have that choice. I love that, we get to be curious and ask questions. We get to step into sovereignty. We have talked about the self. We've talked about the mind. Let's please go into the land of emotions. I'm just going to say for myself, and I know many, 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 this is like, everybody put your seatbelt on, pay attention. If you haven't been, hopefully you're paying attention already, but this, I would love to talk about the emotions.
Like I said earlier, this is an area of our life we have never received any training in, let alone acknowledgement. You were supposed to just suck it up, right? And that's because our own communities and families and so forth didn't know. I mean, even the other day, I was at a kid's birthday party, and it was a soccer party. And the little birthday boy started crying, and his dad comes up to him and says, suck it up, suck it up, suck it up. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And this is exactly what we've learned, right? So again, when you look at the data on suppression, it actually makes the emotion more intense at the level of the brain. So when you're not showing your emotion, just stuffing it, it's like a soda can that's being shook up. No wonder you're going to explode, in an inappropriate manner at some point, or it's going to seep out as passive aggression, or it's going to turn into stomach aches and migraines. And research shows it impacts our relationships negatively too. So it's kind of sad because we've gotten so good at it because it's the only thing we've learned. And so what happens then is also like, intuitively, I think we know there is a way for me to get back to balance. We know there's a way to get back to homeostasis. So what do? We try to reach for something that's going to bring us back there. And that's where we get stuck. Whether you're turning to alcohol, whether you're turning to food, whether you're turning to work, whether you're turning to doom scrolling, entertainment, porn. I mean, God, there's so much at our disposal. That's like the world is your oyster of temptations to try and help you to not feel what you're feeling. Yeah. And in the process, you make the emotion last. And I'm going to share a story with you about this, but look at a child. They feel their emotion 100%. A child under 10, boom, and they feel it. And the emotion is energy in motion. It's moving through their body. It's unpleasant when it's negative, and then it's out. It's gone. How long can an adult be angry for? The rest of their life. The rest of their life. And the more they numb themselves with every possible thing not to feel, the emotion's still there waiting at the end of it, only they're more beat up by their drug of choice and less able to handle it. So what do we do? Sorry for all the negative, but this is kind of the state of, would you agree this is what's going on?
Absolutely. No, this is 100%, I think we weren't taught it. So we got to have compassion, and this whole holding on to grievances for a lifetime, I have seen that with people. And it's no way to live. This is the opposite of sovereignty is what I'm feeling. So yeah, please shed some light.
I'll share a personal story. When I was in college, I had I guess you call it an eating disorder, but I would have think it was eating disorders very similar to addictions, I would say, where whenever I felt bad, which was quite often because I was very happy in college, I would binge. And this is just something that I did. And it was just a cycle over a couple of years. And then one day I decided to go to this meditation event because there was somebody who was going there who I had a crush on. Now, meditation was considered really weird in, what was it, 1996 or 97? It was very weird. Okay, but nobody meditated. There were maybe 3 students on the whole campus. But I was like, look, I'm just going to go. Maybe I'll meet this person. So I went, and it was this like strict Korean Zen practice. It's like for an hour, you stare at the floor and you just, no instruction, no movement. It was, for a 19-year-old, it's kind of intense for 1 hour. I was like, I'm never doing this again in my life. I left feeling, a little more peaceful, but I was like, that's it. I'm never, ever coming back. And the next day, I went back to my dorm room. I was feeling low again. And there was like some old, gross looking pizza. And I thought, oh, great, my chance to binge, because I was feeling low. But in that moment, I had this aha moment. I remembered that every time I binge, I would cry afterward. And this light bulb went off that said, you always cry after you binge. Why don't you cry first? And then you can binge all you want. And I thought, deal, why not? I can give this a try. So I went on my bed and I cried. And when all the tears were out, I sat up and the desire to binge was gone. I never binged again. I never fell for anything again to mask how I was feeling, because I understood that I had to feel it to heal it. Like I had to, it's energy and motion. It has to move through you, even if it sucks. But it sucks more to hold on to this forever and be stuck in our addictions, right? And so it's so challenging to feel the pain. And in the US, there's this idea of the pursuit of happiness is in the Constitution. Like, if you're not feeling happy, maybe there's something wrong with you. It's like, there's not an understanding that we have both. And in other cultures, like in East Asian cultures, South Asian cultures, but also in Germany and other countries, there's an understanding that suffering is part and parcel of life. And in fact, if you didn't have it, you wouldn't actually experience the other side of it. Because we know with trauma, for example, then you try to numb those feelings, you're numbing the positive too. You're numb, period. And so this idea of sovereignty involves awareness, we talked about earlier, but the other thing it involves is courage to go through the experience. And when you do, you deliver it. It's like a baby. It's painful in the labor, and then you deliver it, and it's gone. And it's tough. And by the way, I've gotten comments on this on social media before where people tell me to F off, right? And I get it. Like, it's hard. And nobody wants to feel pain. And at the same time, and there are things we can do to help ourselves sort of digest the emotion along the way, whether it's breathing or movement or going outside. But what you don't want to be doing is the suppression. You don't want to be doing the numbing with the whatever it is you're doing, overworking or whatever it is, you could choose so many things. But you can help yourself with breathing, help yourself with meditation, help yourself with exercising, doing an angry kitchen cleanup, whatever it takes.
Yeah. I love this. This focuses everything. I think I just, for an overly addicted world and society, and part of me just has such compassion for all of us, because I know I was definitely not taught this. For sure, for me, it was also binging. I can tell you right now, I was like, yep, I'm in that category, right? And I was like, where was I to learn? I wish I knew you then, because it was many, many years of not crying, right? And not wanting to feel the anger, the sadness. And I know that's others as well. And it's so true. It's so true. We don't, those energies in motion, they don't just leave, they fester, they stay around, they want to be expressed and released. And I think what you said is also really important, Dr. Seppälä, which is, where did we get this belief that we're supposed to be happy all the time? That's another thing to question. As you said it, I'm like, yeah, I was raised with a little bit of that. And it's like, what the heck is that? Like, that doesn't even make sense. If we're here doing the human experience in a world of polarities, it doesn't make any sense you would have only happiness, because then what would be the opposite? We're meant to experience the spectrum. So I appreciate you reminding us all. And, sometimes, I don't know, maybe you can speak to this. Sometimes there's this feeling of like, okay, do I need to schedule though when I'm sad or when I'm angry, for those of us who are really busy and have full, schedules and lives? And I'm saying this for me and for others that I know, whether it's being a parent and having your own business or having a full life. I know I've had moments where I'm like, oh, I really feel sad. And I don't feel like, like right now would not be an
Mhm.
appropriate time to break down with you. Although I would, I probably at this point, I'm pretty vulnerable here. But, so what do you say to like, do we schedule it? Like, how do
Yeah.
we organically leave room to feel our emotions? What have you seen that works?
You can feel and still go about your day. I mean, I can just think of one moment when I share this in the book, where I had a keynote that I was supposed to be at, and I was in a park with my kids an hour away from my house because I'd forgotten. And in that moment, I felt, when they sent me the message, so are you having trouble logging on? I felt this full bodied shame, such intense shame. And yet I didn't want to go down. I knew not to go down that spiral of self-blame and self-criticism that I talked about earlier. I wasn't going there. And I knew I had to feel it, and I did. And was I taking care of my kids? Yes. Did I drive them home and give them snacks? Yes. Did I start to create a new keynote on, record one and send it to the people and tell them not to pay me for my honorarium and all that stuff? I did it. But it doesn't prevent you from feeling. It's just knowing it's there. You're not pushing it away, right? You're just like, all right, this is what I'm feeling right now, and it sucks. But and you go about and you get up and you go to work and you do the things you have to do. But it's an acknowledgement. And if you can have a little time, then do meditate, process it, right? Do whatever it is. One way to process is also through writing or emotional expression, through art, creativity, or something. Any of these things. If you have a moment, then definitely. But just acknowledging and being like, oh, I'm still feeling this. It sucks.
Beautiful.
But it's here and I'm with it.
As an empath, I felt you and I felt your shame. It's like, oh gosh, oh, I've done something like that. That does not feel good. That does not. Yeah.
And
And
we
so
all go
human.
through these, right? We
Yep.
all go through these kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. You just said something and it reminded me, and I'm sure you've seen this writing, art, creativity. Something that I know helps me sometimes is just having trusted people in my life that I can be like, I am in it. Like, hello, just need to share. So thank you for that reminder. There's so many different ways, but not to negate it. You feel it, and there's so many ways to express. There's so many ways, no right or wrong. It's really powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's talk about, I know before, and I do recommend everybody gets the book, and I'll have the link. It's like a party over on YouTube where we get comments, and wherever you're listening to this show, we'll have the description and also, of course, your book link because it's so good. Let's talk about intuition. It's one of my favorite topics
Mm-hmm.
on the planet. And if we have time to just talk about the body, sovereign,
Yeah.
as it relates to the body.
I think in our society, and one way we kind of bind ourselves to is we overemphasize reason and logic, and we underemphasize gut feelings. And yet research shows that we have the gut feelings. They're like an instinct designed to save our life. And that we actually make better decisions when we follow our intuition. When the decision is complicated, when we go with our feeling, we end up making better decisions, what neuroscience studies are showing us. And yet it's sort of poo-pooed in our society. But, and I love Einstein, quoting Einstein here, because he was a big proponent of intuition. And he said, the logical mind is should be a faithful servant. And the intuition is sort of like the creative spark. But we've created a society where we're honoring the servant and we're throwing out the intuition part, But if we all look back on our lives, there have been times when we have had gut feelings, and we either followed them or did not follow them. And then later we're like, yeah, I knew I shouldn't have married that person or bought that house or whatever it was, right? And it does save lives. My friend Kushal was in the Twin Towers during 9/11, and he was told everyone stay in the building, don't go out. And he ran and he saved his life by a hair. What about all those other people in the building who'd had the same gut feeling but decided to obey instead, right? So there's just mind experiments. And I'm not saying, hey, just follow your intuition blindly all the time. No, but being aware of it. And we're wired for this. For example, if I were to suppress my emotion right now, let's say I was feeling angry about to suppress my emotion, your heart rate would go up. You wouldn't know why, but have you ever had that feeling where you're around someone and you're like, I don't feel comfortable around this person? Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a physio. So our intellect is quite slow. Our physiology is very fast. And so you register that inauthenticity and it raises your heart rate. It triggers your fight or flight response. And you don't even know why. But, and this is an instinct. For example, horses. So you've probably heard of equine facilitated therapy, right? Where there's a therapist working with a horse. And if the patient comes up and they pretend they're not scared of the horse and they're like, I'm not scared, I'm just fine, I'm totally not scared, the horse is anxious, moving all over the place. But as soon as the patient says, okay, I'm scared, the horse calms down. Why? And horses are animals of prey, right? So they are very aware. And when there's inauthenticity, that could be threat, manipulation, hiding something. Do you see that? So it triggers the horse's fight or flight response. We're the same. We register inauthenticity as threat. So it's just one example of how intuition, through our very physiology, can trigger a red flag, and we don't even know why. We're like, I don't know why, but I just got to get out of there, So, and the military's been studying this for decades. It was made fun of in a movie called Men Who Stare at Goats. But guess what? They've got a new research program on it because of how many people came back from Afghanistan and Iraq stating that it was intuition that had led them to make a certain decision that ended up saving people's lives. So there's so much, to think about here. And really, being sovereign also means listening in to your own instincts, your own inner knowings, and you don't know exactly where they come from. Einstein would deliberately go and listen to Mozart because he knew that was when he was getting his best ideas. What happens when you go into a meditative state of mind, like when you're listening to music or you're meditating, is you go into alpha wave mode. And anyone will tell you this. If you say, where do you get your best ideas? It's like, oh, and then when I'm in the shower or walking my dog or it's when those moments when you're not actively focused, alpha wave mode, you're not so relaxed, you're about to go to sleep. You're not highly focused. You're in between. And in that in between space is when you're most likely to get your aha insights. And you can think of that as intuition. So you see, there are many different layers and ways that we can think about it scientifically, but we all know what it feels like to have them if we're in touch. Now, if you're constantly on your device, constantly focused, constantly distracted, taking in over 60,000 gigabytes of information every day, and not working on your own, clearing your own traumas from your past, and so forth and so on, your mind is clogged. It's not sovereign. Because, right, if you have like all this fears from your past clouding you, then you'd be like, I have an intuition that I shouldn't go up on stage and give a talk. Well, it's like, well, is it your intuition or is it just your fear of public speaking, right? I mean, you don't want to get that confused. So that's why I put that chapter later, because I feel like it's really important to start to engage in those sovereignty practices in order to really be able to trust your intuition more.
Oh, I'm so glad we touched upon this. And in that you were, referring to the body as well, the physiological trusting, that sometimes it takes our brain or our mind longer. Our body, being energy, reacts just like the horses. I love equine therapy is something, whole other topic that it's so fascinating, right? To just really get how powerful what we surround ourselves with can affect us. So if you're constantly, like you said, if you're constantly on social media, you're constantly rushing and trying to get things done and not making that time to really slow down, you could mistake intuition, and fear, which we don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hugely important. This has been such a gift to have you. You have such a powerful wisdom and love the backing by science and research as well, Dr. Seppälä. Like, I just have so enjoyed sharing your many ways of looking at sovereignty and being sovereign. This is kind of neat because the way I like to end is really tapping in actually to your intuition. I call them heart flares, where it's like there's maybe just a piece of wisdom or something that either a question I didn't ask you or something that you would like to share, that you're feeling is like a little intuitive nudge, before we close for our amazing audience.
The quality of your life depends on the state of your mind. This is a quote by my meditation teacher, Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. And I think it's something so important to remember, because sometimes, if you could be on the beach in Hawaii, beautiful place, and you'll be upset, and it doesn't matter that you're on the beach in Hawaii, or you could be stuck in traffic here, but you got the music on and you're dancing and you're happy anyway. And that's really powerful, because we often blame our circumstances for how we feel, but actually we have a say over our state of mind. And with practices like breathing and meditation and many other practices, sovereignty practices, we can nurture and cultivate a sovereign state of mind, so that regardless of what happens, we can still show up at our best, at our most sovereign. And that's something we can cultivate. And we don't have a say over what happens to us in our life. We don't have a say over what's happening globally, but we do have a say over our inner sovereignty. And that's why I wrote my book.
Oh my gosh, so powerful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I know you started off by saying you wrote this book from your heart and from a place of deep desire to really help people. And just thank you for being courageous and sharing your wisdom and your beautiful heart and words. And I'll just say to you, our beloved listener, thank you for being courageous to be here with us and to be your most sovereign you-est you. I really believe those are intertwined. Thank you as always. It has been a gift. So much love. And love to you, beloved listener. And we will see you soon and hope that you really take these gems, how to live your most authentic and resilient and sovereign life. My friend, I'm so grateful and honored to be here with you on your journey and being your you-est you. Thank you for watching this episode, for being part of this incredible community and this mission to really step into your light, to your highest purpose. I believe that as we all do that, we all can really be our best selves and uplift consciousness and in humanity. So thank you. I also wanted to say that if you are looking for greater support right now, maybe you're having a health concern or you're looking to really step into that next version, best version of yourself, please come connect with me, whether it's for more resources or coaching or guidance. I would love to support you in any way that I can. Just go to juliereisler.com. You can book a powerful one-on-one breakthrough session there. You can connect with me. I would love to meet you. I'd love to hear how I can be on this journey with you. And before I forget, if you'd like a little more of this good vibe tribe and would like to digest these episodes with a high vibe community, just go to Facebook and look up the You-est You podcast community. You'll find us there. Love always. And thank you so much for taking the time and energy to truly stepping into your authenticity and being your You-est You.